47 years those rings never left this house. 3 days after I buried her, they were gone. I keep telling it that way because that is how it landed on me. Not slow. All at once, in the gray light before 6, when I reached for the small velvet box on Corinne's side of the dresser, the way I had every morning of our marriage. She kept them there at night. The engagement ring with her mother's diamond. The plain gold band I made with my own hands in 1979. She took them off before bed and set them in that box, and every morning she put them back on before the coffee finished. I opened the box. It was empty. I stood there a long time, long enough for the coffee to go quiet in the pot downstairs. I told myself I had moved them. I told myself she had. Then I remembered she was not going to move anything ever again, and I sat down on the edge of the bed on her side, on the cool sheet, and I made myself breathe. Downstairs, my son was already up. Nathan was at the kitchen counter with his phone in one hand and a piece of cold toast in the other. He did not look up when I came in. He had been sleeping in his old room since the funeral, him and Shauna both, telling everyone they were there to help me. I found out later what they were helping themselves to. "Nathan," I said, "the box on your mother's dresser, it's empty." He chewed. He scrolled. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah," I said back. "They were just sitting there, Dad." He said it easy, the way you tell a man his shoelace is untied. "She's not coming back. No sense in a couple of rings sitting in a box collecting dust while everything's this tight." I did not raise my voice. I want you to remember that, because it matters later. I did not slam a cabinet or grab his arm or say the thing that was climbing up the back of my throat. I have spent my whole life with small, precise objects, springs the size of an eyelash, stones you could lose in a carpet. You learn that the hand that shakes is the hand that breaks things. So I kept my hand still. I got my keys off the hook by the door. I got my coat. Corinne's reading glasses were still folded on the windowsill where she left them, and I looked at those for a second, and then I went out to the truck. I drove to a pawn shop out on Route 9. I had passed it maybe 1,000 times in 40 years and never once gone in. There was a bell on the door. A man behind a glass counter looked up at me, an old man in a funeral week face, and I set one piece of paper on the glass in front of him. The man went very still, but I'm getting ahead of myself. "My name is Malcolm Fenn. I am 69 years old, retired. For 41 years, I fixed watches and set stones and sized wedding bands in a narrow shop on Front Street in Marietta, Ohio, a river town where the fog comes up off the water in the morning, and everybody knows everybody's business except the parts that matter. I am a widower now. 3 days when this starts. That is a strange thing to say out loud. Widower. It sits in your mouth like a stone you cannot swallow or spit. Her name was Corinne Adler when I met her. Corinne Fenn for 47 years after. We were married in the spring of 1979. I was 23 and broke, and I could not afford the ring I wanted to give her, so I made one. I took her mother's old diamond, a small thing with a chip on one facet, and I set it in a band I cut and soldered and polished myself at the bench in the back of the shop where I apprenticed. And on the inside of the wedding band, where nobody but the two of us would ever see it, I engraved 4 things. Our initials. And the year, M&C, 1979. "You document everything, Mal," she used to say. "Even love." She was teasing me, but she was right. That is the trade. A jeweler is a man who spends his life proving what a thing is worth, not what it costs, what it is worth. There is a whole science to it, appraisal, and I was good at it, and I never once thought that skill would matter to my own family until the winter I am telling you about. The town saw a quiet old man with a loop and a bad left knee, a man who drank his coffee black at the diner on Thursday mornings and drove a 15-year-old truck and did not say much. That was fine with me. I preferred it. A watchmaker learns to disappear into his work. You would be surprised how invisible a man can make himself when he is bent over a bench for 4 decades. They forgot who I was. That is the thing about being underestimated. It is not an insult. It is a kind of camouflage. You just have to be patient enough to wear it. Corinne was in that shop with me most days in the early years. She kept the books and she talked to the customers I could not, the nervous young men and the widows selling what they could not bear to keep. She had a gift I never had for the people part of it, for knowing which sad story needed a discount and which one needed to be believed. I did the stones. She did the hearts. That was the arrangement for 41 years, and it worked because neither of us tried to do the other one's job. She used to sit on a tall wooden stool by my bench and read while I worked the late repairs, the ones that needed a steady hour after the door was locked. That stool came home with me when I retired in 2019. It sat by my bench in the back room, and Junie sat on it when she visited, and I could not look at it those first weeks without hearing the pages turn. You spend a life proving what small things are worth. You do not think to write down what the woman on the stool is worth, because you assume, like a fool, that you will always have her to tell. Corinne got sick in the fall. It was fast, which the doctors kept calling a mercy, and I suppose from a certain angle it was. She was gone by the middle of November. We buried her on a Tuesday under a sky the color of an old nickel, and the whole town came, and my son stood beside me at the grave with his jaw set like he was angry at the dirt. I thought that was grief. I know a lot about grief. I have learned even more since. What I did not know, standing there, was that Nathan was already 3 months behind on everything he owned. The cuts started at the repast, the day of the funeral, though I did not feel them as cuts yet. You never do at first. Shauna took over the kitchen. My kitchen, Corinne's kitchen. She moved the coffee to a different cabinet and put the good cups somewhere I still have not found, and talked about me to Nathan in the third person while I stood 4 feet away. "He can't be on his own, Nate," she said, stacking casserole dishes people had brought. "Look at him. He doesn't even know where anything goes anymore." I knew where everything went. I had lived in that house for 38 years. I said nothing. There is a kind of tired that grief makes where saying nothing is all you have the strength for, and they mistook that tired for weakness. That was their first mistake, though it would not be the one that undid them. Over the next 2 weeks, it got worse in small ways. Nathan started talking about the house, how big it was for one person, how the market was good right now, how they could all help me find something more manageable. He called my 41 years on Front Street my little watch hobby in front of 2 of my nephews. He went through my desk drawers looking for the insurance stuff. He decided things and then told me about them, if he told me at all. There was a night that first week that told me more than I wanted to know. I came downstairs late for a glass of water and found Nathan at the dining room table with a legal pad, a calculator, and every one of his mother's things spread out under the light. Her jewelry box open, her good serving pieces, the little clock I gave her for our 30th. He was writing numbers next to them. "What are you doing?" I said. He did not even look guilty. "Inventory," he said. "For the estate. Somebody's got to figure out what things are worth, Dad." I stood in the doorway in my undershirt and looked at my son putting a price on his mother 2 weeks in the ground, and I said, "Quiet, I know what they're worth." "Right," he said, not hearing me at all. "The watch guy, sure." I went back up without the water. I lay awake next to the empty half of the bed, and I did not yet know the rings were already gone. I only knew that the boy at that table was measuring the house for a sale and his mother's memory for a markup, and that something in him had come loose. My daughter Claire pushed back the only way she could, which was by telephone, from Colorado, where she lives with her husband Tom. Claire is 41 and she has her mother's spine. "Dad, do not sign anything," she told me one night. "Do not let Nathan handle anything. I'm coming home for Christmas and we'll sort it all out together." "He's grieving," I said. "We all are." "Grieving people don't clean out your desk, Dad." She was right. I just was not ready to hear it about my own boy. Because here is what I was starting to see, and what I did not want to see. There was a man who came to the door one evening asking for Nathan by his full name, in a way that was not friendly. There was a notice from a bank, the kind with a window in the envelope, that I found half under the couch. There was a phone that rang and rang and rang, and that Nathan would carry into the garage to answer in a low voice. My son was drowning. I knew the look. I had seen it on other men at the shop, the ones who came in wanting to sell a wedding band the week before rent was due. Ashamed, not meeting your eyes. I knew that look from the outside. I had just never seen it turn toward his mother's hands. I found out about the rings for certain at that same repast, though I did not put it together until later. I was hanging coats in the front closet the way you do, and Nathan's jacket was heavy on one side. A man who has emptied 10,000 pockets over a workbench notices weight in a coat. I reached in without quite deciding to, and I came out with a crumpled slip of yellow paper. A pawn ticket. I know a pawn ticket the way a farmer knows a seed packet. The shape of it, the carbon smell. There was a name on it that was not Nathan's real name, a shortened version he used sometimes, and there was an address. Route 9. And there was a date 3 days after we buried his mother. I put it back in the coat. I hung the coat up. I went back into the kitchen and I ate a piece of somebody's ham, and I said thank you to Lottie Barnhart, Corinne's oldest friend, when she squeezed my hand. And the whole time the yellow paper was burning a hole in the back of my mind. That is the morning I finally drove out to Route 9, the morning the box was empty and Nathan said she's not coming back. I did not go in blind. I brought a folder. In it was the original appraisal I had written myself in 1990, updated in 2014, with photographs. A close photograph of the inside of the band, M&C 1979, in my own engraving, which I could pick out of 1,000 rings the way you would know your own handwriting. The man behind the counter was named Cy Breward, heavy-set, careful eyes, a pawnbroker who had clearly been doing it long enough to know that most of the sad stories that walked through his door were true. I laid the appraisal photograph on the glass, and then I laid down the picture of the inscription, and I watched him go still. I'm not here to make trouble for you, I said. I think you bought these in good faith. I just need to know when and from whom. He looked at the photographs for a long moment. Then he went to a computer and typed and turned the screen a few degrees toward me, and there they were. Corinne's rings, photographed under his own bright light, cataloged, described. The date matched the yellow ticket. Ohio law, Cy said. I report every ticket to the police that same night. Serial numbers, description, photos, the seller's identification. It's already filed, been filed for 2 weeks. He rubbed the back of his neck. Are these yours, sir? They were my wife's, I said. She passed the week these came in. He was quiet. Then he said, I'm sorry. And he meant it, and he said, I put a hold on them the second you walked in. Nobody's touching these. I asked him what a man usually sells rings like that for, in a spot like his. He told me the truth, which I respected, a fraction of what they were worth. Enough for a man to make one loan payment and buy himself a few more weeks of pretending. Corinne's mother's diamond, 47 years of marriage, my own hands at 23, all of it turned into a few more weeks of pretending. That was the exchange rate my son had accepted. You'd be amazed what people let go of when they're scared, Cy said, not unkindly. I've had men in here cry at that counter. I've had them come back a year later and buy it right back off me, ashamed and grateful both. And I've had some who never came back at all. He looked at me. I hope your fella's the coming back kind. I thanked him. I stood in his parking lot for a while after, in the cold, and I let a thing settle in me that I had been holding off, because it was worse than I had let myself think, and it was also, strangely, cleaner. The rings had been left to Junie. Junie is my granddaughter, Nathan and Shauna's girl, 11 years old, all elbows and questions. The one grandchild who used to sit on Corinne's stool at my bench and ask what every tool was for. In her will, Corinne had left the engagement ring and the band to Junie, specifically, by name, to be given to her when she is old enough to understand what the words inside mean. I had helped Corinne write that line. I was the executor of her estate, so Nathan had not sold his mother's rings. He had sold his daughter's, and I was the man legally responsible for making that right. I went to see Margie Van. Marguerite Van has been the estate lawyer in this county for 30 years, and she does not waste words, which is why Corinne liked her. I put the whole folder on her desk and I told her all of it, flat, the way you read a meter. She listened. Then she tapped the appraisal. You understand what you're holding, she said. It was not a question, but I let it be one. Tell me anyway. You don't need to prove they were hers, Malcolm. You already did, years ago on paper. Appraisal, photographs, the inscription, a scheduled rider on your homeowner's policy. That is a chain of proof most victims can only dream about. She leaned back. And the will makes it worse for him, not better. Those rings weren't yours to forgive the sale of. They were a specific bequest to a minor child. Nathan didn't take a keepsake. He converted estate property that belonged to his own daughter. As executor, you have not just the right but the duty to recover them. And Nathan? She looked at me the way lawyers look at you when they are about to tell you the truth. Selling stolen property, receiving, theft, depending on how the county wants to charge it. There's a police report already open because of the pawn filing. If you push, this becomes a criminal matter, and it should. He committed a crime against an 11-year-old's inheritance. I sat with that. If I don't push, then a set of rings worth $11,000 disappears into a pawn shop's inventory, and a little girl never gets what her grandmother left her. And your son learns that the way out of a hole is to dig into the people who trusted him. She softened just slightly. I've known you a long time, Malcolm. You didn't come here to ask permission to be angry. You came here to figure out how to do the hard thing right. She was correct. That night I did the one thing I am not proud of. I drove to Nathan's house. I sat in my truck across the street with the engine off and the heater ticking as it cooled, and I looked at the lights in his windows, and I thought about walking up to that door and telling him exactly what kind of man sells his dead mother's rings, his own daughter's rings, before the funeral flowers have wilted. I sat there for the better part of an hour. Corinne asked me once early on, when I had a temper I have mostly outlived, to never let anger drive. To pull over, she said. Just pull over and let it pass you like a truck on the highway. I made her that promise in 1981, and I had kept it for 44 years. And I kept it that night too, alone in the dark, where no one would ever have known if I had broken it. I started the truck. I drove home. I decided 3 things on that drive, and I did not change them. I would recover the rings, all the way on paper, so no one could ever say I made it up. I would hold my son accountable, really accountable, in front of the people whose opinion of him he cared about, and in front of the law. And I would try, if the law would let me, to keep him out of a cell. Accountable, not destroyed. There is a canyon between those 2 words, and I had spent my whole life learning to work in the fine tolerances. This was the finest one I ever cut. The next days, I spent building a record. Not a trap, a record. There is a difference, and my son never learned it, and that difference is the whole story. I sat at my bench under the loop light, the good light, the one Corinne used to read by in the evenings while I worked, and I put it all in one folder in order. The appraisal, the insurance rider, the photographs including the one of the inscription, a copy of the will with the bequest to Junie underlined, the pawn ticket, Cy Broward's catalog printout, and on top, a single typed page, because a jeweler believes in a cover sheet that laid out what each thing was. Then I called the number Cy gave me and a detective came to the house. Her name was Ivy Salcedo, property crimes, a woman about Claire's age with a notebook she barely needed to use. She sat at my kitchen table and I gave her the folder and she went through it slowly, and when she finished, she looked up at me with an expression I did not expect. "Mr. Fenn," she said, "in 11 years I have never been handed a victim file this complete. Usually I'm begging people for a photo and a guess." She closed the folder. "The rings are already in our evidence hold at the shop. Given the will, this is straightforward. I can proceed as a criminal matter whenever you're ready to make the complaint official." She paused. "Do you know who sold them?" "I do," I said. "He's my son." She set the notebook down. To her credit, she did not flinch or soften into pity. She just nodded once and said, "Then you should know you can shape a lot about how this goes. The county will care what the family wants. Tell me what you want when you're ready. Not today." Before she left, she stood in my front hall and looked at the wall of photographs, the 47 years of us, and she said something I have kept. "Most people in your spot want it to hurt as much as possible," she said. "They want me to make it big. You handed me a file built to make it exact." She put on her hat. "Exact is rarer, and it holds up better in a courtroom, if it comes to that. Anger falls apart under questioning. Records don't." I told her I had spent my life in a trade where 1,000th of an inch was the difference between a watch that ran and a watch that lied. She smiled at that and said she wished more of her cases came from watchmakers. I thanked her. I have thanked a lot of people in this story. It was a winter of small mercies handed across kitchen tables. Nathan, meanwhile, doubled down. That is the part that is hardest to tell, because I kept waiting for him to feel it and stop, and he did not. On a family phone call with Claire on the line from Colorado, he actually said it. Look, I don't know why everybody's acting like I robbed a bank. You can't even prove those were Mom's specific rings. Just take the insurance money for them and let it go. That's what insurance is for. Claire made a sound like she had been struck. I said, Nathan, I engraved them. Silence on the line. I know the inside of that band better than I know the back of my own hand. And they weren't mine to take insurance on. Your mother left them to your daughter. More silence, then quieter, defensive. Junie's 11. She doesn't even know they exist. She will, I said. That's the whole point of leaving something to a child. You leave it so that one day she knows her grandmother thought of her before she was old enough to say thank you. He hung up. He still thought it was about money. It was never about money. It was about the 4 things I cut into that gold in a back room when I was 23 years old, believing they would outlast me. It was about the name inside the band. Claire flew home the 3rd week of December. She walked in the door, dropped her bag, put her arms around me, and cried the way I had not let myself cry yet. And I held my daughter up in the front hall while the furnace clicked on. And for the first time since the Tuesday under the nickel sky, I felt like there was a floor under me. We talked late that night at the kitchen table. I told her everything. The box, the ticket, Cy, Margie, Salcedo, all of it. She was angry, and then she was sad. And then she got very quiet and asked the question that mattered. What do you actually want to happen, Dad? To Nathan. I want him to have to look at what he did, I said. In the open. Not in a lawyer's office where it's just paper, in front of people. And I want him to face the law for it because he should. And then I want a road left open if he's man enough to walk it. Claire reached across the table and put her hand on mine. Both of us with our mother's blood in one of us and 47 years of her marriage in the other. Mom would have done it exactly like that, she said. We set the memorial luncheon for the 23rd of December. Corinne's friends, her circle, the relatives who had been close. It was not a strange thing to do. People hold gatherings a few weeks out, when the casseroles are gone and the real quiet has set in, to say her name together one more time before the holidays. Corinne would have wanted it. That part was true and clean, and I do not regret using it. The house filled up that afternoon with the smell of coffee and other people's cooking. Lottie Barnhart came early and stayed close to me, the way old friends do. There were maybe 20 people, in and out. Junie sat on Corinne's stool that I had carried in from the bench, swinging her feet, quiet in the way children get when the grief in a room is too big to understand. Nathan held court. That is the only way to say it. He had put on a good shirt, and he moved through the room accepting condolences and telling stories about his mother, and he was good at it, warm even, and I watched people's faces soften toward him, and I understood then that this was the version of himself he needed everyone to see. The good son, the one who was handling everything. Somebody, one of the cousins, asked how I was managing with the house and all of Corinne's things. And Nathan, standing by the mantel with a cup of coffee, said it loud enough for the whole front room to hear. We're taking care of it. I already handled Mom's jewelry and the valuable stuff. Somebody's got to be practical at a time like this. Lottie Barnhart was standing next to me. I heard her fork stop against her plate. You did what? She said. The room did not go silent all at once. It went silent in a wave, the way a pond goes still after you take your hand out of it, the conversation dropping off in rings out from the mantel. I set down my coffee. I had the folder in the sideboard drawer, where I keep the good napkins. I took out 3 things, only 3, because I am a man who believes in showing the fewest parts that prove the whole. I laid the appraisal on the dining room table with its photograph of the 2 rings. I laid the close photograph of the inscription beside it, M&C, 1979, big enough for the whole room to read. And I laid down the page of Corinne's will, with 1 line underlined, the line that left those rings to Junie when she is old enough to understand what the words inside mean. I did not accuse him. I want you to understand that. I did not point or shout or say the word stole. I just let the paper introduce itself, the way I had spent a lifetime letting objects speak for what they were. These are your mother's rings, I said, to the room, but really to him. I made them. This is her handwriting on the will and mine inside the band. She left them to Junie. Shauna picked up the will page. I watched her read it. I watched her get to the underlined line, and I watched her hand go up over her mouth, and I watched her look at her husband with an expression I would not wish on anyone. Nathan's face did a thing I had never seen it do. All the warmth he had been wearing slid off it, like heat off glass, and underneath was a boy. Just a scared boy, caught in a good shirt in his mother's house. "Dad," he said. His voice cracked on the one syllable. "Not here," I said. "Not in front of these people. I could have let you find out about all this from a stranger, Nathan. From a letter, from a knock. I chose to let you hear it from me first, in your mother's house, because you are still my son. But you are going to hear it." There was no shouting, no security walking anyone out, no dramatic ending, the kind they put in movies. Just a warm room full of people who had come to say a good woman's name, learning all at once that the quiet old jeweler in the corner had been paying attention the entire time. Junie on the stool said, "Grandpa, are those Grandma's rings?" And I said, "Yes, sweetheart, and they're going to be yours. She wanted you to have them." That was the only moment I nearly lost my composure, when the child's face did not understand yet, but knew something true and kind had just been said about her, in a room where something ugly had just been said about her father. The next morning, police were at his house. I had known they would be. I want to be honest about that. I had made the complaint official with Detective Salcedo 2 days before the luncheon, and the timing was not an accident. But I had also asked her for something most complainants never ask for. I asked her to bring a road out, not just a road in. Salcedo went to Nathan's door with one officer, early, and she did not put him in the back of a car in front of his neighbors. She had told me she would try not to, and she kept her word. She told him there was a complaint, that the rings were recovered, and in evidence that he was going to have to answer for it, and that his father had asked the county to consider a path that did not end in a cell. Then she told him to come to his father's house. He came to my kitchen table an hour later, gray, wrung out. He sat down across from me in the chair his mother used to sit in, and he put his face in his hands. And my son, 38 years old, came apart at my kitchen table. It came out of him in pieces. The debt, which was worse than I had guessed, a business that failed, and a second loan to hide the first, and a third to hide the second. The collectors. The panic that had turned him into somebody I did not recognize. "I kept thinking I'd fix it before anybody knew," he said. "Every month. Just one more month and I'd have it back before it mattered. And every month it got bigger and I got smaller." He wiped his face with the heel of his hand, a gesture he had done since he was 6. "I stopped being able to look at anybody straight. You, Shauna, Junie. I'd look at my own kid and do math. And underneath all of it, the thing I had suspected out in the cold on Route 9, the real rot. I couldn't look at her hands, Dad," he said. He was crying in the ugly way, the way men cry when they have not done it in years. At the viewing, her hands were folded and the rings were on them, and I couldn't. I kept thinking she's gone. She's really gone. And I couldn't stand to see them there. And I told myself if they were just gone too, then I wouldn't have to keep seeing them. And I needed the money. God, I needed the money. And I told myself it didn't matter because she wasn't. Coming back. There it was. Not greed. Not really. A coward's grief, dressed up as practicality because that was easier to look at. A man so unable to face the loss that he tried to make the evidence of it disappear, and told himself a story about money so he would not have to know what he was really doing. I knew that animal. I had one in me too. Mine just never got the chance to sell anything. I let him cry. I did not reach across the table, not yet. Some things a man has to sit in by himself for a minute before a hand means anything. Then I said, "Here is what is going to happen." And I told him. He would pay back every dollar the rings were worth, to the estate, which meant to Junie, on a schedule, in writing no matter how long it took. He would sit down with Margie Van and Detective Salcedo in the county and accept whatever the diversion program required, the restitution, the counseling, the hours of service, all of it without complaint, because he had earned the right to earn his way back and nothing more. He would get help for the debt and the grief both. Real help, the kind you keep going to after it stops feeling good. And he would understand forever that I had chosen this, that I stood between him and a cell, not because what he did was small, but because he was my son, and a man is allowed to be more than the worst week of his life if he is willing to do the work of it. Why, he said, after what I did, why would you do that? Margie asked me the same thing later, more plainly. The court will follow the family's lead, she said. What do you want, Malcolm? I told them both the same true thing. I want my son back, I said, and I want him to earn it, both of those or neither. Here is what I have learned about justice and revenge, at 69, the hard way, in a kitchen in December. They want the same first move. Both of them start with the truth coming out, the wrong laid bare, the guilty man's face going white in a warm room. Right up to that instant, they look exactly alike, and a lot of people never find out they are different because they stop there. They part on the second move. Revenge says, now I take everything from you. Justice says, now you answer for what you took, and not 1 ounce more. The second move is where you find out which one you have been building all along. I had thought I was building justice out on Route 9. I did not know for sure until I was sitting across from my broken boy, and I felt the pull to keep going, to make him pay past the debt, to let the county have him, and I set it down. That is the whole story. Everything before it was just paper. Winter went out the way it came in, quiet and cold, and my son kept showing up. That is the part nobody tells you about the healing. It is boring. It is a man driving 40 minutes to a counselor's office in the sleet every Tuesday. It is a check for a small amount arriving on the 1st of every month, on time with a note. It is Nathan at my kitchen table on Sundays, not holding court, just doing dishes, sober-eyed, saying less than he used to, and meaning more of it. He paid it back. All of it, faster than the schedule required once he untangled the debt, because it turned out that facing the thing was cheaper than running from it, the way it usually is. He did the diversion, he did the counseling, and then he kept doing it. Shauna stayed, which surprised me, and their marriage got quieter and better the way a repaired watch runs better than a new one, because now somebody knew exactly where it had broken. There was a Sunday in February he came out to the bench while I was working, and he did not say anything for a while. He just watched my hands, the way he used to when he was a boy, before life got loud. Then he said, I never asked what you actually did, out there, to make it come out this way instead of some other way. I kept a record, I said, and then I made a choice about what to do with it. You could have let them take me. I could have, I said. I thought about it in the truck outside your house. I want you to know that. I am not a saint, Nathan. I wanted you to hurt that night. I sat there and wanted it. I set down the loop. And then I decided I would rather have a son who owed a debt than an enemy who paid one. Those are not the same thing, and the difference was mine to pick, so I picked. He nodded, slow. He did not thank me, and I was glad because it would have been too small a word. He just picked up a rag and started cleaning the tools I had already cleaned, which is its own kind of thank you, and we sat there together in the good light and did not talk, and it was the closest thing to peace I had felt since November. The rings came home in March. Detective Salcedo released them from evidence, and Cy Broward would not take a dime beyond what he had paid, and shook my hand and told me he hoped my boy came out all right, and I believed him. I cleaned them myself at the bench under Corinne's light. I sat Junie on the stool beside me the way her grandmother used to, and I showed her the loop, and I taught her to hold the ring up to the light and read what was written inside where nobody was supposed to see it. M&C, she read slowly. 1979. What does it mean? It means your grandmother and I promised each other something before your father was even a thought, I said, and she wanted you to have the proof of it, so that one day, when you're old enough, you'd know we were thinking about you before you existed. She turned the ring in the light for a long time. Corinne left them to the one person in this family, I told her, though she was too young to fully take it, who would ask what the words inside meant. We did not get the old family back. I want to be honest about that too. Corinne's chair is empty, and it is going to stay empty, and there are Sundays it is the loudest thing in the house. But we built a truer one. Smaller, stronger. Claire comes home more. Nathan is a man I am proud of again, not because he never fell, but because of how he climbed. At Easter, we had a Sunday dinner, all of us, and I pulled Corinne's stool up to the table for Junie, and we left her place set, her mother's place, and nobody pretended she was there, and nobody pretended she had not been. We just set a plate for who we had lost and passed the food around who we had left. That is the thing about a family. You do not get to keep it the way it was. You only get to decide what you build around the chair that empties. If you've ever been counted out at your own family's table, if you've ever loved someone who hurt you and had to stand there with the proof of it in your two hands and decide what to do, then you already know the hardest part of this whole story. It is not catching them. Catching them is easy. Any fool with a folder can catch them. The hard part is choosing what kind of man you are once you have. If this story meant something to you tonight, I hope you'll share it with someone who may need to hear it, and I hope you'll tell me in the comments about the person in your own life whose worth your family forgot to see. I read them. Everyone, thanks for spending this time with me. And remember, no matter how deep the hurt or how clear the proof, it is never too late to choose accountability over cruelty, mercy over ruin, and the long, slow work of love over the quick, clean satisfaction of being right.